Can I welcome everyone along to this meeting of the Finance and Resources Committee, formerly the Strategic Policy and Resources Committee. As I explained to yourselves in the session earlier, there will be some slight changes in the remit of the old Strategic Policy and Resources Committee. I think that'll be come clear at the full council meeting with the scheme of arrangement next week. But yes, I would like to welcome all of you here. I'm not going to go through the housekeeping rules about mobile phones. I think you all know the fire evacuation procedures by now, and I think you've got a clear idea of the position with regards to computers, both here and online. And I actually make it, I think there's it's either 5 or 6 of our members. They are in fact coming in online. Right. I think the first thing is clearly apologies. Can I ask Kirsten Clark to advise us of any apologies, and then we'll take a roll call.
Yes, convener. We have an apology from Councillor Forbes with Councillor Freshwater substituting. Good afternoon, members. When I call out your name, if you could please confirm that you're present. Convener, we've heard from yourself. Councillor Ahern. Councillor Bailey. Councillor Bailey. Councillor Barrett.
Present.
Councillor Chan. Present. Councillor Cuthbert. Present. Councillor Drysdale. Present. Councillor Duff. Present. Councillor Freshwater.
Present.
Councillor Lane. Present. Provost McDade.
Present.
Present. Councillor McEwen. Present. Councillor Parrott. Present. Councillor Rebeck. Present. Councillor Shires.
Present.
Councillor Stewart. Present. And do we have Councillor Bailey? Okay, we'll try work to get Councillor Bailey in. Thank you, convener.
Okay, hopefully we can get Councillor Bailey in soon, and I'm sure our people will work on that. The next point is, are there any declarations of interest? I don't see any DIs in the chat box. Did anyone? There being none, we move on to item 3 on the agenda, and that's the minutes of the Strategic Policy and Resources Committee, and that was on the 20th of April, just under 2 months ago. Can we agree the minutes, or does anyone have any specific points to make? Good. Councillor.
Thanks, convener. It was really just to ask. Thank you, convener. It was really just to ask for a follow-up in relation to item 7. The executive director was going to develop and conclude a memorandum of understanding on the revised governance arrangements for Business Gateway Tayside, and the head of legal and governance was instructed to examine the prior memorandum of understanding on dispute resolution and report back to this committee at the earliest opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, in terms of point 4, that was remitted to the Executive Director of Communities, and I'd ask Barbara Renton to respond on that. And on point 5, Head of Legal and Governance, I'd ask Lisa Simpson to respond. Okay.
Thank you, convener. That remains a work in progress. but actively working on it. Thank you.
Sorry, Lisa.
Yeah, convener, I have looked at the minutes of the memorandum of understanding, and there is a very basic provision that allows us the terms of dispute resolution. If matters are not resolved by discussion, they can be determined by an arbiter. There's no particular detail around which arbiter or which form of arbitration that would take, because the memorandum of understanding is of some vintage. I think it was drafted in 2008 originally. Technically, there is the possibility of invoking the dispute resolution clause. In terms of risk, there is no real material benefit to the council at this particular stage to doing that. There is no financial benefit, but there will be a cost incurred with the arbitration costs. As we know, no legal proceeding of that mechanism comes without a cost. In terms of other risks, there is also the risk to the risk in terms of partnership working, relationship working. We could be dragged into a dispute that we're not sure we'd have the backing of Angus Council for. I think there has been acknowledging that the issue itself should not have occurred without the consent of both the other authorities. I think that's been accepted. The sum itself has been reintroduced from, I think, 2021 going forward. In terms of risk of initiating proceedings, I think for us as a council, in terms of our relationship with our partners going forward, that would have to be factored into account, and I don't see the real benefit of pursuing that at the particular point in time.
Councillor Stewart, does that answer your questions? Yeah.
Thanks, it does answer the questions. I think it would be useful to get that assessment of the memorandum of understanding. I would have assumed that that would be in written format. I think in terms of benefit to the council, no, there wouldn't be any direct benefit to the council, but of course restoring the historical funds which were top sliced from the Business Gateway service would be of benefit to businesses across Tayside, not just in, not least in Perth and Kinross. And I think an assessment of the risks in terms of the partnership working should also include a balancing risk about not allowing partners who are working with us to undermine the terms of an agreed memorandum of understanding with no comeback on that. So I think it would be useful to get that back in written form, so that we can have a proper debate about it and decision about it in future. That's okay.
I can see that comment.
Thank you, Convener. If I may please, just to back up the advice provided by the monitoring officer, the opinion of officers at this point is there is no benefit to council. The information in terms of the arbitration is set out within the minute of agreement just now, so I'm unclear as to what further advice the committee would require, but happy to be directed. But the risks that the monitoring officer have set out are clear in terms of our relationship with neighbouring authorities, and the opinion of officers at this point is there is no benefit to council in pursuing any further action.
Okay, then I can see there's also a question here from Provost McDade.
Thank you, Convener. I would have liked a paper, as has been mentioned, but since we don't have a paper, things that I would have thought might be in that paper would be about the costs involved. So the head of legal and governance mentioned there would be significant costs, and there's no clarity in terms of who would be appointed arbiter. In previous legal agreements I've read, usually an arbiter is appointed by the Law Society of Scotland, and what sort of costs would that normally incur, in terms of the scale of what our businesses are losing out on. And then I also have a comment as well, but I'm happy to just wait on that point.
Does the comment?
The provision within the memorandum of understanding, and bearing in mind a memorandum of understanding is not a minute of agreement or a memorandum of agreement, and is less binding. But nonetheless, there is an understanding across the parties that we would look to adhere to that. So there is one difficulty in the first instance, that our foundation document is a memorandum of understanding and not a memorandum of agreement. The provision within the arbitration clause, the dispute resolution clause, is a single clause. It simply says that you will appoint the arbiter. The reason that I was saying the type of arbiter that would be is that this is not something that necessarily falls within the standards or the categories of arbitration that we would normally look to. It also it hasn't been updated and doesn't prescribe that in the absence of that, it goes down the arbitration clause that's appointed under the 2010 legislation. So we would need to assess what type of claim this is. And one of the difficulties that we have in terms of identifying the route of arbitration is that it's it's not really a claim for money, because it's not money that's owed to us. It's actually a point of principle that you're seeking to seek arbitration of, in which normally the outcome of that would be some sort of declarator. And I think there's already been an acceptance by the parties that the decision shouldn't have been taken without the prior consent of the other two parties. Now that is acknowledged. So a declarator would simply be telling us and confirming us what we already know. So one of the difficulties around the costs is we don't actually know what type of arbitration this would take place. Now there are other things that we could look at by way of agreement, which we could perhaps suggest some form of mediated discussion between the parties. However, there is an opportunity, given that we now have a new administration and a new leader, that perhaps some further discussion can take place at a political level that might then help shape discussions going forward. But in terms of recommending whether or not we advise going ahead with initiating dispute resolution proceedings at this particular point, weighing up the wider risks and in terms of the political risks that there are in terms of partnership working going forward. On the balance, this is not something that I would recommend, but ultimately it is a matter for council to determine.
I'm also, I know Thomas Glenn wants to comment again, and then I will take question from Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Convener. My comment was very simple, and I think the monitoring officer has set that out. Based on the historic nature of this, based on the likely outcome in terms of any benefit to the council, based on the question of arbitration, which is a single line and doesn't determine who the arbitrator would be and the cost of that, so we can't answer the question in terms of cost, and based on our desire to move forward with a productive relationship with our colleagues across Tayside, the advice from officers just now is this a matter that we don't progress, but clearly that's a decision for a committee.
Okay, could I just say before I turn to Councillor Duff, one thing I didn't do at the start was to thank my predecessors as convener and vice convener of this committee, Councillor Lyle, who's now retired, and also Councillor Duff, who is still very much with us, and I'm sure there will be extensive discussions, even debate over coming months and years. But I welcome Councillor Duff to ask his question.
Thank you for these kind words, Convener. My question to the Head of Legal and Governance is, is this a matter which the Business Gateway is open to the Business Gateway Board to enter into arbitration with Dundee City Council on this matter and to take it to any kind of legal action that it so wishes? Okay.
So the terms of the Memorandum of Understanding just covers the situation between the member authorities as the parties to that Memorandum of Understanding. So the dispute resolution clause really just relates to our ability, Dundee's ability and Angus Council's ability to pursue dispute mechanism. It would be open to Business Gateway in their own light to challenge something if they thought that there was a ground or an area to be challenged. The issue, of course, is that they have a contract which they have accepted, and they accepted the value of that, and that's what has been awarded. That's now been remedied in light of discussions that we have had as member authorities with Dundee that we're all more than aware of. But Business Gateway, I'm sure, could explore something if they were so minded to, but at this particular point in time, they're satisfied with the terms that they are. The money is being reinstated. There is no pressure from Business Gateway on us at this particular moment in time to take any particular action. And I think that, you know, lessons I believe have been learned. It's perhaps a time just to draw a line over it and focus on our positive relationship with our colleagues in Dundee and Angus going forward.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'm not moving a report here, but I'm going to take, there are at least another two, in fact, three comments, questions. So I'm going to take an order, Provost McDade, and then Councillor Rebick, and then Councillor Stewart once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you very much to the Head of Legal and Governance for her answer to my earlier question, and indeed to the Chief Executive for his answer as well. I think my concern is that we are very concerned about our relationship with Dundee as our partner authority. I'm not convinced that they are as concerned about their relationship with us, given that this matter was first raised when I was a new elected member about 5 years ago, going back several chief executives ago, and the money has only just been reinstated. So we've known about this problem for nearly 5 years. It was raised with them nearly 5 years ago. The money is only just being reinstated now. I'm not convinced that they are as concerned, and I've not seen any public statement to that effect that they have acknowledged. You know, we've been told that they agree that it's wrong, but I'm not really sure that I've seen any evidence of that. And I'm concerned that the precedent that it sets for us to partner councils that we are in close working relationship with, if they feel that this is something that they can do. So whilst I appreciate that we are concerned, I'm not sure that they are as concerned about the relationship with us. And this is only one matter on which Dundee City Council leads on behalf of all three local authorities. So I'm concerned about the precedent it sets from our point of view going forward.
Thank you, Provost McDade. Could I? Councillor Rebick.
Thanks, Convener. Notwithstanding Councillor Stewart's comments, which were entirely appropriate and accurate, may I say, it does feel like any formal arbitration at this point should be avoided if at all possible. It does feel where we are in the electoral cycle and where we are in terms of relations with Dundee City Council, it does feel like maybe we should try and avoid that. That would just be my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Convener. It was a comment to come back on a few of the points that have been raised. So Councillor McDade has very succinct, Provost McDade has very succinctly expressed the point about partnership working going forward. And obviously, as he pointed out, although the Chief Executive said that this is a historic matter, when it was first raised, it wasn't a historic matter, it was a very current matter. And it's been remitted to officers to resolve this. We've got to a point where the money has been reinstated to the budget on an annual basis, but the historic amount that was topsliced has not been reinstated. And that is to the detriment of small and medium-sized enterprises across Tayside, including in Perth and Kinross. And that is the key issue here. In terms of the point about arbitration, I would simply point out that if agreement can't be reached on arbitration, then the arbiter shall be mutually agreed by the parties in dispute, failing which it shall be approved by the Sheriff of Tayside, Central and Fife at Dundee. That is what it says in the memorandum of understanding. So there is a route through in terms of establishing how to proceed with arbitration. I still think it would be useful for a written report to come back summarising the points that have been made verbally and giving elected members an opportunity to reflect on that and to consider a way forward, but also addressing the points and questions and comments that have been raised in discussing this today. A further question that arises, however, from the earlier answer from the Head of Legal and Governance Services is that if this is a memorandum of understanding which is not as helpfully binding as a memorandum of agreement, but the previous item in the recommendation from the last meeting of the Strategic Policy and Resources Committee was that the Executive Director was to develop a new memorandum of understanding in terms of Business Gateway Tayside. Would that be more helpfully, would it be more helpful to all of the parties going forward if that was more binding than a memorandum of understanding and that was a memorandum of agreement?
I'm going to ask, given your comment, first of all, back to the Head of Legal and Governance, and then I know Thomas Glenn wants to make a further comment. That'd be.
Yeah. I mean, I think in terms of the minute of agreement or memorandum of agreement, there would need to be an appetite from all three parties to enter into that. If the appetite is simply to have a memorandum of understanding, the point I was going to make earlier was that the opportunity for reviewing that does allow us to make some of the provisions a bit more robust and a bit more clear, because as I say, that document has not been revised since 2008. So I think the review of whichever document we end up with does provide an opportunity to tighten and provide clarity, which would hopefully give the council more assurance in terms of operating going forward. But we couldn't unilaterally change that. It would depend what the appetite of the rest of the parties were. But I think even with a memorandum of understanding, there is an opportunity to tighten that going forward as part of the review.
Thomas.
Thank you, Kavira. A final comment, and then I will take whatever instruction committee decides to give officers. We're very clear that this is a historic matter. Matters have moved on since that point. There has been a Tay Cities deal introduced since then. There is a new chief executive in Dundee City Council. There is a new administration here and elsewhere. We believe that there's a very productive relationship with colleagues across Angus and Dundee, and what happened on this occasion does not reflect the positive relationship that's in place just now. So I'm confident in terms of the relationship with the chief executives and other officers across Tayside that's a productive one, and we have a shared understanding of how we behave.
Okay, are there any further questions, stroke comments? What I'm going to say is I think, I've heard a number of the concerns that have been expressed, and these go back. Certainly there was the scrutiny committee report at the end of November last year, and that's a fairly detailed document. I think the officers have heard what has been said. I believe that there being no further questions, comments, what we should do now, bearing in mind the comments that have been made, and officers, hearing what you said, but we actually now move to actually approve the minutes of the Strategic Policy and Resources Committee on what date in April was it? 20th of April. Yeah. Can we agree the minutes? Okay. Okay, that's quite a lengthy amount of time, but rightly so, to spend on what I think is an important matter. Can we now move on to the next item on the agenda? And this is, we've got item 4 and item 5 It's appointment of members to the Executive Subcommittee of Finance and Resort of this committee, and also appointment of members to the Provost Subcommittee at present of this committee. What we've asked here is that this should be deferred until full council a week today, when we will have the scheme of administration, and then people can discuss and consider. And also, I think it gives more time for the administration to consult with the leaders of other groups, and so we can get the appropriate balance on those committees. And there are other subcommittees as well of other service committees. So have we agreed on that?
Agreed.
Yep.
Agreed.
Okay, we move on to Treasury activity and compliance report. And this is for the fourth quarter of the financial year, the period up to 31st of March. As a report, probably in the past, I've tended to ask a number of questions, but I'm actually going to desist this time and let yourselves ask mainly the questions. Then I might yet come in with one or two things at the end. But I'd like Stuart Mackenzie to present the report. Sure.
Thank you, Convener, and good afternoon, councillors. Can I just check if those elected members online can hear me? I assume so.
Yep.
If possible,
Yes,
can
we
I?
can hear you. Yeah.
Thank you. It's not normal procedure for officers to try and move anything in committee, but I'd like to move that we record the convener's comments on the report in terms of asking questions. So that is a matter of public record. Thank you. So thank you, convener. This report advises the Committee of Treasury activity undertaken during the last quarter of financial year 2021-22. There were consecutive increases in the UK bank base rate in February and March of this year in response to rising inflation. Public Works Loans Board rates, in turn, increased across all borrowing periods, with movements shown in Appendix 1. Treasury activity during the quarter is summarised in Appendix 2. There was no new long-term borrowing undertaken, but one PWLB loan of £7.5 million was repaid, reducing the Council's total long-term debt to £611.3 million at the end of March. £90 million of new borrowing was previously undertaken towards the end of 2021, when PWLB rates reached a historic low. This was reported to the former Strategic Policy and Resources Committee in February of this year. Consequently, there was a higher level of funds available to invest over the period January to March. Investments during the quarter ended 31st of March, which are summarised in Section 4 and Appendix 2 to the report, will generate a return of approximately £1.1 million. Investments were generally undertaken over a shorter duration in anticipation of the opportunity to reinvest, given the likelihood of further increases in the bank rate, as was the case in May, and perhaps may be the case tomorrow. The Council's total investments at the end of March stood at £252 million. The potential indicators in Appendix 4 show the affordability, forecast financing requirement, and long-term debt position of the Council. The indicators were updated as part of the annual Treasury and Investment Strategy report in March to reflect the additional capital expenditure approved in setting the budget. The maximum borrowing limit for the Council, the authorised limit, has increased to £1.2 billion over the 6 years of a capital programme. There were no breaches in compliance with Treasury and investment policy, and all prudential indicators remain within approved limits. Happy to take questions, Convener.
Thank you. Are there any questions? That puts me on the spot, doesn't it? Oh, I see Councillor Parrott.
Thank you very much, Convener. I note at paragraph 4.3 that the average interest rate on borrowing has increased only very slightly, and I assume that that's because most borrowing is done at fixed rates over the term. I notice at the second bullet, paragraph 4.8, that the average interest rate on short-term investments has increased quite considerably. But of course, the sums of money involved are less. So can Mr. Mackenzie give us a figure as to, if you like, the net cost per month or annually of the increase in borrowing interest rates at the moment? To what degree is the rise in interest rates materially affecting us in actual cash terms at the moment? Thanks. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Councillor Park, for your question. So there's two sides to that equation. In terms of expenditure, increases in bank rates tend to be reflected in PWLB rates. However, those rates are spot rates, they vary from day to day. So we have target figures from our Treasury advisors in terms of borrowing. I don't have the numbers you're looking for to hand. I will certainly source those for you. But there's an impact on our expenditure of increased rates. There's also an improvement in our returns on the investments we have, either in short-term deposit or in fixed rate deposits. And we are generating more from our fixed rate deposits. To give you a sense of that, and in terms of very recent transactions, with a deposit which was taken out at the beginning of June for £10 million, and that's generating 2.4% in interest. Now, that's still lower than what it would cost to borrow that money. So that's what's known as the cost to carry. But there's an expenditure side to the equation in terms of increasing the cost of our borrowing. There's a benefit in terms of the returns that we're receiving on our investments. But I can source you a figure for 1% increase in PWLB rates in terms of cost to the council. That will help.
Yes, that would be of use, because it, just to measure the sensitivity there. Could I ask now Councillor Drysdale to ask a question, followed by Councillor Dalton.
Thank you, Convener. I have two questions. I'm happy to come back and just give one at a time if you wish. Yeah. Okay. So my first question was in relation to. Sorry, I should preface this by saying just to thank and congratulate, as always, the finance team for guiding the council through what must be extremely difficult times and maximising the income to the council and minimising the interest and debt servicing costs. I would like a shot of your crystal ball at some time, please, if that's okay. I just wanted to reference, first of all, in the prudential indicators in Appendix 4 and the item 7, the maturity structure. Reference is made to the outstanding debts under PPP and PFI liability graduated over 30 years. I'm aware that, or I believe that the figure of 22 million within the next 5 years relates to Pooler House. I'm wondering what, if you can clarify what the major components are of the larger figures between 5 and 30 years of a further, almost 100 million within these timeframes. And in relation to that, I noted in the Scottish Government's spending review that the Cabinet Secretary said, and I quote, that the new deal for local government in Scotland, which is being worked on with COSLA and Solace in the coming months, will hopefully confirm that further flexibilities requested by COSLA will be made available to councils for existing service concession arrangements such as PFI funded projects. And I wondered if by any chance, Mr. Mackenzie or any of his colleagues had any further information on that little nugget.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Councillor Drysdale, for your question. So if you can bear with me, I'll try and recall the component elements of that. In terms of our maturity structure, for some considerable time, the best value in terms of the market, in terms of certainty, has been borrowing over a longer period. So most of our borrowing now is balanced over a longer period. In terms of the PFI and PPP liabilities, the figures, if we have a look at Indicator 5 in Appendix 4, for the benefit of elected members, you'll see a line 127 million pounds as at the 31st of March. The vast bulk of that liability relates to our schools contracts, rather than Poor House, which is a PFI contract. So our schools contracts are public-private partnership PPP contracts, and they run into the 2040s. In terms of the service concession issue, I can share with the committee that we've had some good news on that point. We've had some clarification through Scottish Government officials. So we are working on what the implications of that might be. We won't be able to clarify that because the actual change requires a change in regulation, and until we see the detail, we can't extrapolate what that means. But in essence, the argument which has been put to the Scottish ministers, Scottish Government ministers, is that councils are accounting for these contracts, and they're predominantly schools contracts and local government, over the life of the contract rather than the life of the asset. So the argument is that we're over accounting at the moment, and that will have a financial benefit. But just to quantify that, we'll need the regulations, we'll need the detail to do the due diligence work for the modelling. But the news is positive.
Thanks for that. That's very helpful.
Just say that it sounds potentially very encouraging, but I know it's a very technical area. Could I move to Councillor Duff? You have a question.
Thank you, Convener. My question is on paragraph 6.3, where you talk about the £90 million that we took from the Public Works Loan Board. I just wondered if Mr. Mackenzie could remind me of the term over which that amount was borrowed and the rate at which it was borrowed, and what these Public Works Loan Board rates are sitting at now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duff, for your question. If you can bear with me a second, what I'm going to do is just quickly reference back to the report which went to the former Strategic Policy and Resources Committee on the 2nd of February. If you can bear with me a second, just to answer your question directly. So the term, there were 4 loans taken out, which constitute £90 million. 3 of those were for 50 years. 1 was for 49.5 years. So let's call it 50 years. The average interest on that borrowing obviously varied between the loans, but with one exception was below 1.5%. And the exception was at 1.51%. So that was then. In terms of PWLB borrowing rates, I can give you today's figure because they are market rates. I did come prepared for a few questions from the convener, as you might anticipate. So the same loan, if we took it out now, would be at 3.29%.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Otherwise, I'm going to turn back to Councillor Drysdale, who has a second question. Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, I just wondered, and I'm no economist, as will be obvious, other than fairly elementary level. I just wondered, given the comparative levels of inflation in this country versus certain European countries, I wondered whether the opportunity, should we need to enter the money markets, the opportunity to do so with overseas banks is higher on the agenda than it would normally be, and are there better rates, better opportunities with overseas banks currently?
Thank you.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Councillor Drysdale, for your question. And I should have offered my thanks for your kind comments in terms of finance colleagues. We are appreciated and they will be fed back. So thank you for that. I'm just again looking at what we call the daily sheet, which is the list of our investments and where they are. So to give members a sense of how that's spread out, and I am going analog here. I am looking at pieces of paper. I know the convener will approve, but my colleagues perhaps not so much. And as of yesterday, we had around £120 million of deposits in principal UK clearing banks and £86.5 million of deposits in foreign banks, overseas banks, predominantly in Australia and the Australian and New Zealand banking group. And the interest rates average for those two sets of investments cumulatively are about 1.2% for UK banks and about 1.5% for foreign banks. So there's certainly opportunities to invest in the high quality counterparties. So obviously we're managing risk here, but these are very highly rated institutions with billions of pounds under their management. And we are seeing improving returns both in the UK banking sector because of the increase in base rates, but also just because of what's happening in the economy elsewhere as well. So we're really just trying to manage that process overall and also in terms of our cash flow. But we have the capacity and we do invest in overseas banks.
Thank you, Stuart. Any further questions? Okay, I've just really on this occasion one, and that relates to the investments outstanding you referred to, Stuart, to UK banks and foreign banks. The one really big change over I think really the last year has been other local authorities and local authority lending, and that's down to 45 million, and I suspect it may now be less than that even. Is that due to basically a function of the market and liquidity?
Thank you, Convener. That's exactly what it is. So as of yesterday, in fact, it'll be as of today, we have £35 million outstanding with two English local authorities. These are long-term deposits, which were generating at the time very positive returns. Two things have happened, obviously, as a function of the market. If you think about the local authority response to COVID over the last 2 years, a lot of that has been about providing support to local businesses through business grants. So most local authorities were in the market to secure funds at the best rates we could. So that buoyed the market quite considerably. That has, as we've moved from response to recovery, and I use those words advisedly, that has quietened that market down. We will always seek to look at opportunities because it's almost a sovereign-backed investment, but we aren't seeing the same level of activity there. Thank you.
Thanks. And just one other question, and that before we move to the report, or I move the report, is actually the Bank of England announces its interest rate. I think it's tomorrow, probably, yes. And then UK inflation rates are what is a week today, but it could be 1.25, could be 1.5. But the actual expectation you're showing on 3.2, with inflation returning to its 2% target level by 2024, that's a bit ambitious, is it not?
Thank you, Convener. We've taken those figures from the Bank of England's forecasts. So I'm not in a position to comment on the prudence otherwise of the Governor of the Bank of England, but those are the figures they're using. It would be good to see that, absolutely. In terms of expectations over interest rates, I'm not going to speculate, but you've given an indication of where they might be.
Thank you, sir. Right, I'd now like to move the report. Do I have a seconder?
Happen to formally second, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Lane.
I just thanks, Convener. Problems with the chat function there. I'd just like to thank our officers for again being diligent in their work, and we can see by the income from the investment, one of the appendixes is over £1 million. So they have to be commended, and as was referenced by Councillor Duff, on taking out loans at a beneficial rate that we'll see the benefit moving forward. So it was just a compliment Mr Mackenzie and his whole team. Thank them for the work going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Lane.
Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I'd similarly like to thank the Head of Finance and his team for their excellent stewardship of the Council's funds. And I think the example given in paragraph 6.3 about borrowing when the time was right and at the lowest levels has shown that if we were to borrow that amount now, the interest rate would have doubled for us from 1.5 to over or nearly 3.3%. So not only are we saving on interest rates, but we're also able to invest that money at beneficial rates now. So there's a double done, I think, in terms of the strategy that was deployed here, and I very much welcome Mr Mackenzie's tactics in this occasion. Thank you.
Don't think there's any further comments. I'd just like to add myself my thanks to Stuart and Scott and the rest of the finance team for what they do. I think Councillor Duff is absolutely right. The move on the 90 million at the time looked good. It actually looks better now. And I think we've shown Perth and Kinross, our finance team, that really can adapt changing circumstances, that are nimble, are fleet-footed, and I think that bodes well for the financial challenges we are undoubtedly going to face over the next 2 to 3 years, and I think that's important. Right, can we agree the report?
Agreed.
Thank you. We now move on to a report that always comes out at this time of year, and that's the report number 7, and that's the authority to write off debts and obsolete stock. It's important, this report, in the sense that it's a key element in also completing the annual report and accounts of the council for the year to 31st March 2022. Once again, could I ask Stuart Mackenzie to present the report and speak to it?
Thank you, Convener. As you've noted, this report sets out approval to write off identified debts and obsolete stock. And again, as you've said, this is required to allow appropriate adjustments to be reflected in the Council's accounts for 2021-22, which will be considered by the Audit and Risk Committee on the 28th of June. The recommendations set out in section 4 of the report for each source of income are made following exhaustion of the debt recovery processes available to the Council. However, should further information become available to enable the cost-effective recovery of debt, it will be written back on. And to give you an example of that, we are seeing negative figures in the appendices that's where debt is being written back on, not written off. Appendices 1 to 5 of the report set out the reasons for the proposed write-off of debt. I would ask members to note that the proposals within the report relate to several financial years, not just 2021-22. The proposed write-off of debt, therefore, generally represents a fraction of 1% of the total generated for each source of income over a number of years. I would also highlight in-year collection levels for council tax of 97.7%, non-domestic rates of 94.29%, and housing rents of 99.08% in 2021-22. Whilst the report is, by necessity, focused upon those amounts which have not been recovered, the council continued to collect the overwhelming amount of the income it raised in 2021-22, despite the challenges presented to individuals, families and local businesses by the pandemic. As members will appreciate, these challenges have recently been compounded by the impact of high levels of inflation on households and businesses, and the council can reasonably expect more difficulty in maintaining collection levels going forward. Colleagues continue to engage with customers in supporting them to maintain payment during these difficult times. In common with a position being adopted by a number of local authorities, the report seeks approval to waive charges for adult care and support services for people seeking asylum with no recourse to public funds and all refugees within Perth and Kinross. To date, those seeking shelter within Perth and Kinross comprise younger people and their families, and the financial consequences of the proposal are currently not significant and can be contained. The position will be reviewed annually. Colleagues, and we have a number of colleagues from local taxes and other services available, and I are happy to take questions, Convener. Thank you.
Do we have any questions? There are a number. Yes, I think Councillor Drysdale's first.
Thank you, Convener. And again, I have more than one question, but I'll ask one question, and depending on what other questions are, I may come back to my further questions. Noting the level of proposed write-off across council tax, non-domestic rates and housing rent and overpayment of housing benefit adds up to almost £1 million in the year, £1 million that the council can ill afford not to receive. I just wanted to understand. I know that every effort is made to collect these, and there has been, and there's a pandemic and all the rest of it. I just wondered if we applied more resources internally to efforts to collect the difficult debts, would we yield more success, or are we at an optimum level? And in particular, sorry, just as a follow-on, if you like, I also notice the level of uncollected penalty charge notices, which is up 45% in between last year and the year before, and 100, almost 1 in 5 parking tickets are not being collected. Is there anything that we can do with that in relation to applying more resources internally to chasing up these debts? Thanks.
Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Drysdale. I'm going to make a general comment, and then perhaps colleagues who are online from local taxes, we have a colleague Lynn Brady and my colleague Kevin Fraser, perhaps respond to your comments around resourcing and the collection of debt. And I would anticipate that we have some colleagues from communities. I don't know if Fraser or colleague Caroline France would like to take take that question. But in terms of the write-off, yes, not insignificant amounts, but for council tax, £279,000 over 29 years, or 2 billion. Now, I know we refresh that number every year, so it's not an absolute total, but back to my opening remarks, proportionately, it's a very, very, very small amount that we actually write off, and we'll write it back on. But perhaps in terms of resources, and if I can pass to colleagues who may be online.
Yeah, I know Fraser Crofts is going to give a response on the question, the element of the question about parking, and also Lynn Brady is going to come in. So Fraser, first of all, yourself, then Lynn. Thank you.
Thanks, Convener, and thanks, Councillor Drysdale, for the question. So in terms of the parking debt, I would point towards the figures from last year. 163,000 was proposed to be written off in 2021, and that figure has actually reduced to 103,000. There is a quirk in terms of our accounting. You'll see that the debt being written off relates to the period to October 2020, and all debt and all unpaid penalty charge notices up to that point. The calculation that's used to present the percentage of number of PCNs unpaid relates to the following financial year. So in this case, the financial year 2021, which of course was during the peak of the pandemic. During that time, we saw our number of penalty charge notices drop considerably to around 40 to 45% of the previous year. What we're seeing, therefore, in relative terms, is a higher proportion or percentage of write-off compared to the number of penalty charge notices issued. Just for context, in 2000 and 2021, we had 5,872 penalty charge notices, and the year before, 1920, and that was 13,401. So you can see how the value, the overall value of the debt relative to the number of PCNs issued makes that figure look higher. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you. Councillor Drysdale, then I'll come to Lynn.
Yes, so sorry, it's just, I mean, perhaps Lynn's comments might be useful as well. Just my general question really is whether by the council applying further resources to the collection process, whether that would yield better results.
Okay, I'm going to take next Lynn Brady and also Michelle Dow in respect of the element relating to housing. So Lynn Brady first and then Michelle.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Just to break this down a little bit, in terms of the value of write-offs, no, I don't believe that additional resources would change the level of write-offs. For council tax, we could only write off mainly when the debt is actually irrecoverable. And you'll notice from the columns, the higher value columns are reasons such as sequestration or deceased. These, we have to legally not collect and write off money in certain cases for these. So no, additional resources wouldn't help with that. In very general terms, of course, additional resources will always help in terms of collection. And I think, you know, we've already highlighted the really good collection rate for a current financial year. Any additional resources would always allow us to perhaps do more in respect of previous financial years. But I think in general, it is a very, very good collection rate with the level of resources that we do have. I don't know if that perhaps answers your question.
I'll turn, thanks, Michelle. Can I turn to Lynn? Can I turn to Michelle? Michelle Dow?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Drysdale, for the question. In terms of housing's approach, in terms of whether additional resources would make a difference, whilst we exhaust our own internal procedures, which Lynn's team will do the same, for debts above a certain level, we pass these to the sheriff officers for a track and trace and the vast majority of the debt that we are writing off, the sheriff officers are coming back to us to say they've not been able to trace the individual, or basically they've got no funds or no prospects, so there's no potential ability for them to be able to pay the debt. But echoing back on what previous colleagues have discussed, you know, we do write debt back on, and you know, I know in terms of the housing service, quite a relatively small amount, but last year we wrote back on just over £11,000 in terms of debt where tenants became known to us again.
Thank you for that response. Just ask Councillor Drysdale, does that now answer your overall question?
Almost, yeah. Just if I may, just one small follow-up point in relation to Appendix 2, council tax written off during financial year 21-22, summary of write-off reasons. Under the column no trace, there's a big jump from typically 3 figures or small 4-figure figures to 20, 26, 36,000 in the last 3 years. Am I understanding that to be actually a positive story there, that is a write back in the last 3 years, or is that a negative trend?
Have a response?
If it's okay, is it all right if my colleague Kevin Fraser replies to this? He's actually been involved in working on this and pulling the statistics together.
Okay, yes.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Councillor Drysdale. Yeah, the ones that highlighted no trace are either two things. They are either people that we previously couldn't trace and we've now managed to find and reinstate the charges due. But there is also an element there of accounts that are in credit where equally we cannot trace the parties involved and they're to be written off. The reason that the more recent years are higher is simply just because there's more traffic on those years, there's more debt still to be collected. The figures for older years are probably smaller because the write-offs or the write-ons would have been included in previous financial years.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Parrott has stated that his question about the car park trading account has effectively been answered. We're now going to move on next for questions to Councillor Bailey. Your question.
Thank you, Convener. After my earlier connection glitch, could you confirm that you can hear me okay in the chamber?
Yeah, can hear you.
Perfect, thank you. My question is about the section about removing charges for asylum seekers. Obviously, this is absolutely fantastic news that we're able to do this, so really happy to see this proposal in the paper today. My question was, though, about to help us understand the scale of this support we're providing. I know that maybe the number of refugees and asylum seekers will maybe sadly increase in the coming years. But so far as if we were to have done this for the past 3 financial years, maybe, how much would this have? What would the?
It's a shame. He's back on.
Do you hear me again? Sorry.
Yeah. Could you conclude the question, or Councillor Bailey, or repeat the question? I'm sorry about this, but it's just that there's been a slight interruption in the minute.
Yeah, sure. So the question in summary was, if we'd have waived the questions for asylum seekers over the last 3 financial years, how much would that have cost us, just to get an idea for the scale of this intervention? Thank you.
Stuart, but maybe possibly another officer.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Councillor Dawson. I don't have those figures to hand. I don't know if any colleagues on the call would be able to provide a response. I think the Chief Executive wishes to comment.
Thank you, Convener. Based on the current figures that we have in terms of levels of interest, around about support for Ukrainian individuals who are fleeing the crisis in Ukraine. We have 343 individuals who are looking to be housed in Perth and Kinross, and members of our housing and other teams are carrying out the necessary checks and looking at the disclosures as well. If it'd be helpful, we can look at support over the last number of years and provide members with a briefing note. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Bailey. And yes, I think that would be helpful, just to gauge the, where we stand. Could I now ask Councillor Rebick, who has the question?
Thanks, Convener. I refer to Council House tenant collection rates of 99.08%. I think, given the potential financial hardships and indeed the real financial hardships that some of our families are facing and will continue to face, that actually feels like a very positive collection rate. Is it?
Michelle, is it?
Yeah, I can take that. Yes, it absolutely is, Councillor Rebecca, a positive outcome for us. We finished last financial year obviously at 99.08%, and I'm delighted to say that so far year to date collection for this financial year is sitting at 99.58%. However, what committee need to bear in mind is obviously we've got funds like the Sustaining Tenancies Fund, which is a significant financial investment that we can make to support tenants who are working and engaging with us and maintaining repayment arrangements. So that fund is between £200,000 to £250,000, and that's a recurring budget. We've also got the Think Yes Fund. So our teams have all got a small pocket of money for each locality where there's no set criteria. They just have to adopt that kind of P&K offer, Think Yes, and just look at anything that they can do to financially support a tenant. For example, with white goods, where they may have to replace a cooker, etc., that may impact on their rent level. So whilst the collection rate is good, it's taken a significant amount of work, as I'm sure everyone around here who's involved in collection will testify to for our teams. But yes, the collection rate is good and heading in the right direction.
Thanks, Michelle.
Next question. Thank you, Councillor Rebick. Is Councillor Barrett? Your question?
Thanks, Convener. My question is with regard to paragraph 4.18 of the report and the write-off for arrears on garages and lock-up sites of just under £3,000. I wanted to ask, because it's not in the report, what is the collection rate for garage site and lock-ups, and what is the percentage of garage lock-up rents does that 3,000 represent?
Okay, I don't have that information to hand, Councillor Barrett, but I'm more than happy to go and get that collection rate information for you and the percentage of income that represents.
Thank you.
Thanks. Next question is from Councillor Shears. Caroline Shears.
Thank you, Convener. My question is at paragraph 4.3 on page 32 of the report, and it's the write-off by service, and it was following on from the discussion in the Scottish Parliament last week about school meal debts being chased up by local authorities. It was to seek clarification around the levels of school meal debt in Perth and Kinross, what's been done about it, and the support that we're giving to families to access the free meals that they might well be entitled to. Thank you.
Response. Greg.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Councillor Shars, for the question. So our current debt at the minute is 20,000. We're obviously working very closely with our families. We obviously try to signpost them to obviously relevant parties to support that, and our schools are working very closely with the parents. There is obviously a difference between who can pay and who doesn't pay, who can't pay. So we work closely with that to ensure we follow up as appropriate to ensure that we minimise any debt we have, but equally support any families we have within Perth and Kinross.
Councillor Shars.
Thank you, Greg. That's helpful. And can I, as a supplementary to that, can I just check with the Ukrainian families that are arriving that they'll obviously qualify for meal support and all the support that's been, making sure that they get the right information, etc., is all being done? I'm sure it is.
Yeah, yes, Councillor Shares, we were doing that and obviously providing the free school meal, and obviously until they actually had the forms are all completed, so it's all done formally. But yes, we're providing that meal and the support to the families. Yes.
Thank you, Greg.
Yes, thanks, Greg. Right, I don't see any further questions unless anyone has. Right, that being the case, I'd like now to move the report on the write-off of debts and obsolete stock. So I move the report. Do I have a seconder?
Happy to second.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Right, we move to comment. We have an order, Councillor Lang and coming up here, Councillor Rebick and then Councillor McKeown. There may well be others. Thank you.
Thanks. So several comments to make on this report, Convener. I think that if we're looking at this from the correct end, this is a very impressive collection rate of 99.8%. I think it is fantastic in these current times that our officers are able to collect this amount of outstanding fees. I think to answer Councillor Drysdale's point, I think to increase the resource and capacity and to collect is actually a subject to the law of diminishing returns. When we're sitting at 99.8, to put more resource and capacity into that is subject to that law. I'd like to think that this is shows that our welfare rights team are ensuring that people are able to receive all the funding that they're entitled to receive, and that's what's helping to make sure that they're able to not have the worry and stress of being unable to fulfil the requirements to pay council tax, etc. I think ourselves as a council should take some credit in that, because across the council we have supplied financial hardship funding through the HRA and then through the financial inclusion measures that we took at the statutory full council. So I think we can all take some credit for helping people who are really needing help at this time. And as when it comes to the waiving of the charges for adult care and support services, this is for the most vulnerable people in our society who are coming over here, and it's absolutely the right thing to do. So I really welcome this report. Thank you.
Thank you. Could we now have Councillor Rebick?
Thanks again, Convener. It was just very briefly, just to notwithstanding what Michelle says, it's just to agree with her. I think our housing officers do a great job when it comes to rent collection, and in particular, if I can be parochial just very briefly, I know how hard that the local office in Latham work. It's a difficult balance that they strike between sympathy and empathy on the one hand and assertiveness on the other. They do it very well, and it's really appreciated as far as I'm concerned. So thank you.
Thanks. Councillor McEwen, followed by Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I had to mirror the comments made by Councillor Lane and Rebick. I think we have great teams that do great work with our communities and supporting people, and to try and collect as money as best possible. I think going forward we need to ensure that support is there for people and there for those that are most vulnerable. And I think what the public should take away from this paper maybe isn't the headline figure of what gets written off, but the fact that if in the coming months they're having any issues with their finances at all, is to ask us for help as early as possible so that we can engage with them and support them and not allow them to get into problems in the first place. Thank you.
Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I think the details contained in the report highlight the excellent work of this council in collecting monies with sensitivity and in a caring manner. There will always be some who, for various reasons, will struggle from time to time, and I'm pleased to see that appropriate support and help is offered where that is the case. Thank you.
Are there any further comments? I would just like to concur with so many of the comments that have been made. The collection rates, I think, are outstanding, especially given the turbulent times we've been going through. They really, I suspect, and I'm not certain on this, how we compare with other local authorities in Scotland, but I'd have thought we compare actually very well indeed. I don't think I've seen a league table in terms of council tax collection rate. But I think the other point, though, is we've also done it with humanity as well, as far as we possibly can. I think that's reflected in 5.5 on charges for asylum seekers. So I'm just absolutely, and I think it's just the right, the proper thing to do. So can we agree this report? Agreed. Right. And Mr. Mackenzie gets a bit of a rest now, I think. Well, not for too long, actually. We move on now to the Business Management Improvement Report. I actually thought what would be the best way to do this was to take it with an introduction and the annual performance report with an introduction from Karen Donaldson to give an overview on the report. And I thought it would be helpful, not just so much for yourselves, but I think most of you know the service heads, but also for the public as well, is for a reasonably brief, about 3 minutes or so, just snapshot from the service heads of the remit of the areas that they cover. So I'm going to ask, and also I think there's the follow-up from scrutiny and from the meeting last week. I think Karen Donaldson is going to refer to that. So Karen, thank you.
Thank you very much, Convener. As Chief Operating Officer, I am pleased to present the Corporate and Democratic Services Business Management and Improvement Plan to this first meeting of the Finance and Resources Committee today. Our BMIP, and if you forgive me, I'll stick with the abbreviation, presents the opportunity to set out the breadth of activities and impact of the service. Corporate and Democratic Services connects and collaborates with all council services and many of its partners. In so doing, we support and enable delivery of services, improvement and transformation in support of corporate priorities. Corporate and Democratic Services also deliver a range of services, specialist customer services, which are essential to the everyday lives of those who live and work in Perth and Kinross, such as registration services, licensing and our customer contact centre. Indeed, the work of our revenues and benefits team, which includes welfare rights, is critical to supporting households in accessing funds which help with the cost of living increases being experienced by all. This year's BMIP further develops many of the priorities we identified last year and sets out how the service will contribute as strategic enablers of change and transformation, supporting democratic processes and civic functions, and managing the governance framework. Importantly, Corporate and Democratic Services have led the development of a financial strategy which will be considered by Council next week. And this sets out an approach for securing financial sustainability at a time of unprecedented financial challenges and changes in demand for services. The Business Management and Improvement Plan sets out our 6 priority themes along with expected impacts and outcomes. As the convener referenced, I am aware that Scrutiny and Performance considered the Corporate and Democratic Services BMIP last week, and we welcome the feedback that was provided. Unfortunately, with the timescale for issue of the report, there has not been the opportunity to reflect those comments and feedback within the version that you have today. However, these will be incorporated as we continue to monitor performance of the service over the year. I'm joined by a range of colleagues from across the service who will introduce themselves and provide a brief overview of their remits, and all of us will be happy to take any questions that you may have. if I ask Alan Taylor to start off as we run through this short session. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Yes, afternoon, councillors. Very briefly, I am Alan Taylor and I'm the Council's Head of Corporate IT and Revenues. My team and I are responsible for the Council's IT service, our digital services, and the Council's Customer Service Centre, which many of you know takes calls from members of the public and is based in Poorhouse. And I have Lynn Harris, one of the service managers from that area, with me here today to help with questions. I also lead the project team that are implementing Mosaic, which again, many of you will know is the new social care system replacing the current system, which is known as SWIFT. And Sandy Strathern, the programme manager who is responsible for that project, is also in attendance today. And finally, I manage the Council's very substantial and very impressive revenues and benefits service, which contains functions such as local taxes, housing benefit, welfare rights, and the Scottish Welfare Fund. And as you know from earlier questions, both Lynn Brady and Kevin Fraser are with us. Thank you very much. I believe I'm passing you over to Stuart Mackenzie now.
Sure.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Alan. So my name is Stuart Mackenzie. I think most elected members know me. I'm the Council's Head of Finance, Section 95 Officer. The Corporate Finance and Procurement division within CDS is fairly small, around about 37 people. And I'll just break down the activities, a lot of which end up in this very room in front of yourselves. So there's obviously the financial strategy, which Karen has alluded to, policies, the corporate budgeting, corporate monitoring, final accounts. We also provide accounting and budgeting support for CDS and indeed for the common good funds and charities. And I know that members will hear from my colleagues in that and the reports that they take. We have treasury management and cash flow. That's a team of 2 individuals involved in the activity that we've just been talking about. We have an insurance team, again, 2 colleagues involved in that. We have exchequer and payments. We deal predominantly with the larger sums of money which come out of the council, so payments to HMRC, Scottish Water, those sorts of issues. We have a financial systems team who deal with the maintenance and development of the council's financial systems. We have sales ledger, 3 colleagues who've collected £24 million of fees and charges in the last financial year. And we have our national award-winning procurement team who deal with procurement policy, support and strategy and community benefits. Thank you. I don't know who I'm passing to. Pauline. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Pauline Johnston, the Corporate HR Manager, and I'm responsible for the HR division. And basically that means that any workforce or people activity affecting staff across the council is normally part of the remit that I'm engaged in. We work proactively with all the services throughout the council to make sure that they've got their fundamental workforce requirements and that employee experience is at the heart of everything we do in terms of HR service delivery. I've got 4 team leaders who look after recruitment, resourcing, corporate workforce plan, the wellbeing, equalities of the staff, the MA and graduate programme that we operate as a council. We've got HR services, that's the employment relations, employee relations, contracts, resourcing, recruitment, transformation and change agenda, and HR performance and systems, where we look at data, HR and payroll systems, FOIs, systems administration, payroll and reward, making sure everybody gets paid on time, benefits packages, and making sure that everything we do creates a great employee experience, workforce issues, working with the trade unions, making sure that the staff's flexible and mobile, and enabling all of these things to happen across the council. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Most people will know me, and you members are probably sick seeing me. I'm Lisa Simpson. I'm the Head of Legal and Governance, and I'm also the Council's Monitoring Officer. Within Legal and Governance, we have quite a broad range, broad portfolio both internal governance services and external facing services. I've got four service managers within the team, and we cover obviously legal, and we have two teams operational there, one focusing on people and communities, which take into account social welfare, adult protection, child protection, housing, education, employment law matters, and anything basically relating to people and communities. We have another team that's more focused on commercial contracts, conveyancing, roads, infrastructure, procurement, and that type of business. We're also responsible for the internal audit function, and the Chief Internal Auditor reports to me. We have external facing licensing, which deals with civic and liquor licensing, so all your taxi licensing, street traders, pubs, premises managers, etc., are all processed through that. And obviously we've had a very busy time dealing with all the additional grants that have come to support people during hardship during the period of COVID. We have a team that specialises in information governance and security and cyber security, and they also deal with the outward-facing functions of freedom of information requests and data protection requests. And we also have the statutory data protection officer within that remit as well. We have democratic services, which are perhaps the service that you're most familiar with, and a number of them are in the room today, which also provides member support, and they're the function that deals with all of the operation of local democracy, and also support members in their day-to-day business as councillors. We have another external facing, we're responsible for the registrar's service, and also corporate complaints. So a real mix of outward facing services and internal system of control. As well as the monitoring officer function, I'm also the Senior Information Risk Officer, and I also take a lead in the risk management of the council. So that's a whistle-stop tour of the legal and governance. Thank you.
Thank you. To conclude, Stephen Crawford. Hi, Steve. We're not hearing you. You're on mute. Yeah, we think your microphone may be, yeah, just your microphone. Yeah, we're just not hearing you. Could you pull down your microphone?
Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, right, that helps.
Sorry.
Yeah,
yes.
Get there.
my apologies, stage fright. Okay, good afternoon. My name's Stephen Crawford. I'm the head of property services. I've got a team of 90 that work to me in delivering property services across the 200 buildings that we occupy. The team of 90 contain project managers, architects, engineers, surveyors, maintenance officers, compliance officers, and clerk of works to hopefully deliver the quality of the product. The team also includes the caretakers and the premises officers and the mailroom that keep the corporate offices in Perth operating. We maintain the 3 million square feet of operational property. And we deliver the maintenance services account for about £4 million of spend directly through our budget, £2 million of capital, and currently about £6 million energy bill that we maintain through the energy team. We will probably live in a world of contracts and procurement. We're managing the bulk of the capital plan, certainly all the property projects, everything from roof replacements through to PH2O when that comes online, and obviously are heavily invested in the current large projects such as Perth High School, Blair Rec, Riverside Primary School, which is on site, and City Hall. In terms of staff, we we work in an environment that's under quite a lot of strain at the moment. We are growing a lot of our own staff via professional trainees, graduates, modern apprentices, and we work very closely with procurement and health and safety colleagues and legal colleagues to pull the whole lot together. So happy to take any questions at any time.
Thanks, Stephen. Right, I'm going to throw it open to questions, either Karen or to any of the service heads here. So do we have any questions? I'm just waiting to see on the screen. First of all is Councillor McEwen, followed by Councillor Barrett.
On page 18 of the report, 74 of the document, it talks about the CO2 detectors that have been put in the offices. And this is probably one of the biggest changes I've seen personally since we came back after COVID. My experience with them, though, is unless we sit with the windows open, more than 2 people in any room means they go orange, and then I one experience the red quite reasonably quickly. And at this time of year and on the cusp of a heat wave, that probably will not be an issue, because we'll probably want said windows open anyway to get any sort of breeze. But obviously come the winter time, when the heating's on, opening up windows isn't going to exactly help our fuel cost. So I suppose the roundabout question there is, are these CO2 detectors in the air conditioning that we're talking about, ventilation, is it working sufficiently? Because that's not the experience I'm feeling so far since coming back.
If I could answer that question, we've had CO2 detectors in in 2 High Street since we refurbished it in 2016, and also in our newer schools. Over the course of the pandemic, ventilation and air quality became a real focus, and you're right in identifying that if people, all the 80% of our buildings have got a natural ventilation strategy, expecting people to own to open windows. The issues that we identified since you've come back are the exact issues that the schools have had in the last 2 years, when there's been a focus on maintaining ventilation to mitigate any issues with COVID. So there's a question that, and it's a big national question: thermal comfort versus air quality. And you can only really, through a forced ventilation system, mechanical ventilation system, mitigate against that. So we've got, we have legacy buildings, and you're right. During the winter, it is more challenging to keep the buildings warm when you're opening the windows.
I suppose a Scottish solution will be tartan knee rugs.
I think the solution would, and that's been coined before, is bring a fleece to work, as well. But that, we work in an environment now where we expect the buildings to be 20, 21, 22 degrees, and many of our houses are hotter than that. But many of the buildings were actually designed at a time when the acceptable temperature was a lot lower than that.
Thanks. Right, next question, Councillor Barrett, followed by Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, convener. Page 63 of the pack, page 7 of the report, and page 8 provide information regarding the case study on the upgrade of the building management system, which has some really positive impacts on the reduction in energy consumption of over 2 million kilowatt hours and reduction of 347 tonnes of CO2 emissions, as well as cost reductions of 70,000. I wanted to ask, how far through the 70 sites that were instructed in 2020 are we, and is there any possibility of accelerating the further 30 sites to harness those benefits sooner than 2024?
I'll answer that where I can. Predominantly the 70 sites was an upgrade in the software So that was done quite quickly, all run from our central BMS system here in Pooler House. We're working through the extension of that to other buildings as we do other upgrades to the buildings, and the limitations of that are actually getting sites designed, getting the installation in, and getting the contractors and making sure the systems are commissioned properly. In putting the context, the 2,000 kilowatt saving, 2 million kilowatt saving is out of a total corporate consumption of around about 58 to 60 million. So it is quite a significant change.
Councillor Barrett.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Was there any opportunity to accelerate the remaining 30 sites? And sorry, was the 70 done in a winner?
The 70 effectively was a software update, so that was done from here, and the other 30 sites, I'll have to come back to you on that one. But I think at the moment I'm trying, my biggest challenge in the current market is keeping things to program, never mind trying to introduce accelerations, and if that's just a practical side.
Okay, point taken.
Nice. Right, now Councillor Stewart, followed by Councillor Duff, followed by Councillor Cuthbert.
Thanks, convener. I think my questions are for, respectively, Mr. Mackenzie as Head of Finance and Mr. Crawford as Head of Property. They relate to the key performance indicators on page 31 of the performance report and plan, or page 87 of our document packs. And it was really just to ask about, as a follow-up from the Scrutiny and Performance Committee meeting last week, what the legislative or good practice guidance targets for public bodies paying invoices are to Mr. Mackenzie, and the target, what targets might be appropriate, or how is the gap being dealt with in terms of proportion of our buildings that are suitable or in satisfactory condition for their current use to Mr. Crawford.
Thank you, convener, and thank you, Mr. Stewart, for your question. I'm happy to respond on the good practice issue around prompt payment. If I can refer to a fairly recent document, which is the public procurement guidance, it's prompt payment in the supply chain, SPPN 2 brackets 2022, and the annex to that guidance states or sets out a standard clause for public bodies use. It's guidance, it's not statutory, it's guidance. The requirement to pay contractor and subcontractor invoices within 30 days throughout the supply chain or public contracts. The council's standard terms of business are payment within 30 days of receipt of an invoice for supply goods and services. Going back some time, the Scottish Public Finance Manual, which is not directly applicable to local government, and again is guidance, did include a target for public sector organisations set by the Scottish Government for payment of invoices within 10 working days of their receipt. Now that was advisory at the time, that was some time ago. Just to reiterate the response I gave at the Scrutiny Committee meeting last week, during the pandemic, we accelerated all payments. So we more than met that for our standard terms of business of 30 days. That's in line with a best practice from a more recent document, and that's what we set up. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. If I could answer Councillor Stewart's question both on condition and suitability. The suitability assessment is an assessment by the occupants. And merely we report this on a corporate perspective. So the schools do an annual suitability assessment that gets fed into as part of their school estate management plan, and we've adopted the same principle for other occupants. In terms of condition, the data is sourced through an ongoing 3-4 year condition survey review that we make ongoing identification of elements or buildings that require investment. In answer to how, can we get to 100% there? The process is that we use capital funding for single buildings. We would use capital funding, capital bids to address condition and bring those forward. Sometimes those take a long time to actually implement. And as you can see, from 2021 to 21-22, we've gone from 89 to 93 as a result of one, doing the surveys, and two, an ongoing period of investment that we've had over the years. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. So, sir. Okay, Councillor Duff.
Thanks, convener. My question is, just let's see what the page number is. It's on page 62, at the top of page 62 of the pack, and it's about the procurement team's community benefit scheme, which won the recognition at the National Go Awards. And I just wondered if there was a wee update on how that is currently going. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Councillor Duff. Indeed, yes, I'm trying to get the appropriate reference. So the procurement team were winners at the Scottish Awards, and then followed that up with a highly commended award at the UK National Go Awards around community benefits, and that's predominantly around the advertising and the access, which is done through a website, dedicated website. So there's been a little bit of follow-up, perhaps somewhat limited and curtailed because of the pandemic, but there has been some follow-up with the procurement team attending meet the contractor, meet the supplier events, just to build on that momentum. But really what we're trying to do is make the link between communities requests and contractual obligations in terms of the contracts that we let with contractors as easy and as accessible as we can. I'm happy to take on board any suggestions from elected members in that respect.
I'm aware that a number of organisations, certainly in my own ward, have taken advantage of the opportunity to get some benefits from a variety of our suppliers, and I would encourage others to promote it. Thank you.
Thanks. And last question, although I've got a couple myself, but Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, convener. My question relates to page 87, 31 of the report. It's to do with the KPIs. It breaks down into two halves. On one part is the gender pay gap. I couldn't quite work out whether women are better paid or men, because it's just minus 1.1%. So someone can clarify that. And the other question is whether we could put targets in future productions of KPIs, so we've got some idea of how we're performing against target rather than just previous year.
I can answer the pay gap. It's 1.1% in favour of women. So if it's a negative figure, it's always in favour of women.
Thank you for that.
Convener and Councillor Cuthbert, in terms of targets, yes, this is work in progress in terms of the performance framework for corporate and democratic services. So we are working on setting targets for all of the areas here, and also increasing the range of indicators that we have for service performance. You will see that when the next version comes forward.
Thank you.
Any further questions from anyone? Okay, I'd like to ask, and Taylor may feel that he has escaped any questions, but I do want to ask about two things. One is on Mosaic, because I do remember when I came onto this council, I was on the audit committee. I think one of the first things we considered in the audit committee was the replacement for SWIFT. And it's only this year, I'm not quite sure when about this year, Mosaic is going to come in, so it's just why it's taken such a long time. And the other part of the question on IT is on the performance management software system, which is a different system, but to what extent, when does that come in? And even though we've got the whole government benchmarking just now, in terms of performance measurement, we'll be able to assess the council's performance relative to other local authorities in Scotland in perhaps a better way. Thank you.
Okay, convener. In terms of, excuse me, replacement for Swift. Yes, it's been a long time in terms of coming forward. From memory, the original business case was drafted by my colleague Sandy Stern back in 2017-2018, and through the capital process, that money was then capital budget process. That money was then added into the budget. The main reason for a delay in the plans that we had within Perth and Kinross Council was that there was a legal challenge to the procurement process that was undertaken by Scotland Excel, which delayed the process for us, and we had to restart the procurement process. We now have an implementation plan from Servalec, who provide the Mosaic system. The planning part of that implementation plan takes us, I think, to this month. Sandy might come in and confirm. And then the next part of that implementation plan is from now through to September, October next year, which is the timeline for implementation. Sandy, I'm not sure if you've got anything to add with regards to the question on Swift.
No, Alan, don't. But just to say, yes, the delays were due to COVID slightly, and due to the challenge in courts, that delayed us by about a year and a half. So that's how far behind we are. But it's good to say that we're still within budget and should finish within budget as well. Thanks.
Okay, convener, the second part of your question regarding the managing performance reporting system, I believe that is now known as PK Performs. That's something that's actually been taken forward by our communities colleagues because they lead on performance, and I am not sure if there's anybody here from communities that can say more than myself, but we are at the implementation stage now. There is a company called CAMS that have been appointed, and there is fortnightly implementation meetings. There is the module that they're implementing first is the risk module, and that there's already commencing with that, I believe, and then the strategy module. It's a system that's used by other public bodies, and it should enable us, obviously, to monitor performance reporting in line with the expectations of council. I'm not sure if that's a detailed enough answer or if you had a second part to that question.
I think that I think what would be helpful is something we did in audit committee, and it might be more general application. Is if at some time we did a briefing for elected members on the various IT systems that the council uses, and I'm thinking of the likes of Concerto, Integra, and I know like any large organisation, it tends to be a bit of a patchwork quilt. But it's how they interrelate, how they tie into one another. Because the capital spend on new systems really can be quite hefty, and far more than the amounts of debt that we were discussing earlier that have been written off. So it's just an idea to do a kind of briefing session, and so people know that Mosaic is about social work and what it relates to. Yeah, on you go.
Convener, I think we could add into the development programme for elected members an overview of systems, just to give that high level overview, if that's something that elected members would find helpful in terms of their remits. Just we could incorporate that within the ongoing development programme.
Okay, thanks. I think it would be, because it is an important aspect of what we do. Can I, just one final question myself before we move to moving the report. The best value assurance report done by Audit Scotland, who are also going to be our auditors, but it's a separate process. That's quite a it's quite a complimentary document, but it did have some criticisms. That's published in 2019. When is the next one likely to be produced? Is there kind of a timeline on it?
I don't have a date for the next best value assurance audit. I'm wondering whether Barbara Renton has any indication, or Charlene Guild, Head of Innovation. I don't have that information, and if they don't, then it's something that we can bring back to you, but I don't think we have a timescale for that.
Thank you. If I can come in, Karen. Convener, then Audit Scotland work around all 32 local authorities. Tends to be at least a 5-year programme, but it depends on whether they need to return to any local authorities that they've got specific concerns about. So we wouldn't expect really them to be back any time before probably about 2024.
Okay, that's helpful, because obviously, given what may well happen over the next year, 2 years, with us as a council, that I think it may be quite an important report, but that's further down the road. Right, I don't see any further questions. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Convener, I'd ask for just a quick question, if that's okay.
Yes, Councillor Duff, yes.
Thank you. Tim, top of page 63, it says there's been a 20% growth in the number of rateable lands and heritages in Perth and Kinross over a 5-year period. Is that just an indication of, the number of additional properties and such likes that now come into Perth and Kinross over the last 5 years?
Who's best to answer this? Finance?
Kevin's going in, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Duff. I think I can answer that one for you. It's a combination of two things. In 2017, which would be captured in that period, shooting rights were returned to rating for the first time since 2005. So that takes care of about approximately 1,200 new entries that we have to administer, and the rest is just general growth in the area, which is obviously a positive thing, reflecting the numbers of properties that we now have to administer.
I thought that was probably the case. I just wanted it clarified. Thank you.
I think I'm right in saying that's following in part, the Bartley review, yeah.
Partly, I think the
Right, okay, that's fine. Right, what we're going to do is then I'd like to, being no further questions, I'd like to, sorry about that, Kevin. I'd like to move the report. Can I have a seconder?
Happy to formally second, Convener.
Are there any comments? So, Councillor Parrott.
Just by way of comment and perhaps for slight amusement, top of page 64, it talks about our reduction in energy consumption of 2.1 million kilowatt hours, and that's in many contexts that's just a large number, but I was casually working out that it's enough electricity for 1,000 Renault Zoes to each do over 9,000 miles a year, so it's fairly large. Thanks.
Thank you for that fascinating piece of information. That will. Any further comments? Anyone? No.
I had asked for comment.
Sorry, on you go.
Yeah, at least I think it's in there. Yes, how do I follow that, I suppose? But yeah, look, I welcome the report. I think which documents the wide and varied activities of corporate and democratic services. I think it's a very positive report, and there are many excellent case studies which show the added value which the team have procured for the people of Perth and Kinross such as the local full fibre network, the community benefit scheme, which we talked about, and also the £5.3 million of additional benefit secured for the most vulnerable people by the Welfare Rights Team. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? We agree with the report? Right, we now move on to the final report, although I have one other comment to make after that report. So please wait after that. But it's on the Loch Leven, on guidance. It's probably unusual that this report is coming to this committee, but it was, and I think in future, a report of this nature would go to the it will either be the Climate Change Sustainability Committee or Environment and Infrastructure. But because of how it came about, also gone through, I know, the Kinross Local Area Committee, and I think that's important to stress. So I'm going to ask Barbara Murray to speak to the report. So Barbara, thanks. Brenda Murray.
Convener, thank you. Good afternoon, councillors. This report provides an update on the responses received and the changes made to the Loch Leven guidance following consultation. It also incorporates the views of the Kinross Local Committee, as the convener has said, and that was considered at the Kinross Local Committee meeting on the 21st of April. The guidance itself is an update of that which was in place for the previous local development plan. It sets out the requirements for phosphorus mitigation for private wastewater systems to ensure the protection of the water quality in Loch Leven. It's been developed to assist applicants submitting proposals for development within the catchment area to comply with Policy 46 of the current local development plan. The guidance itself is a fairly technical document, and paragraph 4.1 of the report highlights that the majority of issues raised relate to minor technical changes requested by SEPA and Nature Scot, and these have been incorporated into the revised guidance contained within Appendix 1. The Kinross Local Committee was content with the revised guidance and agreed to recommend it to this committee for approval. They did, however, raise concerns in relation to other related issues, but out with the scope of the guidance, which they would like to see addressed by the next local development plan. As mentioned in paragraph 4.7 of the report, further work is currently ongoing to engage with partners, including Scottish Water, SEPA, Nature Scot, and the local councillors, and that will explore the issues raised by the Kinross Committee and any improvements that may be brought forward for the next local development plan. And the Kinross Committee indicated support for taking this approach. The report recommends that the committee approves the Loch Leven guidance to support the implementation of Policy 46 of the local development plan. And I'm happy to take any questions, convener, as is my colleague Robert Wills, who's with us today, and he's taken the lead on drafting the guidance.
Before we move to questions, I don't know if Robert wants to say anything, and I also see on screen Peter Marshall. He may want to perhaps make one or two comments. No? No. Okay, we shall move then to questions. They're being seemed. Councillor Stewart.
I think Councillor McEwan's first. Oh.
Indeed, first. Thank you for that. And then yourself.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. I read this report with great interest because where I live in Perth, there's a loch system as well, and it suffers the same issues and the same planning restrictions as well related to phosphate. One bit of the paper where it sort of had me scratching my head was 5.8, where it discusses the number of houses that would be in a plan and talking about the number of houses that get built. And I thought in relation to phosphate, it's the amount of phosphate produced by a house, i.e. the number of people, bottoms in that house. that is the actual marker. So one house with one 4-bedroom house could have the same phosphate production as 3 2-bedroom houses could have. And actually the important thing is the number of people that would be expected to live in any said development, not the said number of houses that are important in relation to phosphate production.
Brenda or Robert?
In terms of when we were drafting the LDP, I mean, that, you know, that is a correct assumption. When we're preparing the plan, you know, we did realise that there is this issue in relation to, you know, the Kinross area specifically. So it was felt that it would be prudent to look to allocate some of the housing land requirement for the Kinross area out with that housing market area and to the Perth housing market area to try and, you know, alleviate any potential issues, you know, arising from that aspect. So it was taking account of the sensitivities, you know, in relation to the loch itself. So that was kind of why we, you know, chose to take that approach.
That's you know,
question. Robert might be able to say more with regard to the technicalities around the, you know, phosphate per person, per house, etc.
Yes, thank you. I think that's it is a valid point. Obviously, within the plan, it's quite difficult to manage numbers of people. So it came about by looking through the environmental assessment of the development plan, previous development plan, and looking at how much areas were constrained by designations and environmentally sensitive areas, and the Kinross housing market area was a lot more constrained by environmental considerations than other areas. It was something like 86% versus the next highest was around 56 or 60%. So that was the reason why we took that decision to move as a precaution, really, 10% of the housing market land, if you like, to another area. It's a crude measure, but it's kind of the best we've got, really, that we can control through the plan.
Yeah, thank you for that. You know, the local approach is very important in all these things. So I just want to confirm that it's people that produce phosphate, not houses.
Councillor Stewart, followed by Councillor Parrott.
Thank you, convener. Actually, I'll maybe rephrase my question, make it a neat follow-on from Councillor McEwen's on the answer that we've just heard from Mr. Wills. Although the housing market numbers in the Kinross area have been or were reduced in the local development plan, I think also in TAPE plan by 10%, that reduction, which is aimed at protecting this Ramsar site of special protection area and Ramsar site, has been completely blown out of the water, pardon the pun, by the exceedances on the housing site indicative numbers, hasn't it? So we're not going to achieve a 10% reduction. We're you know, we're not sitting at 90%. We're sitting at over 100%, given the emissions that have been consented, are we not?
If I could come in on that one, Councillor Stewart, in terms of you know, the housing numbers, if the housing numbers are you know, if a site is approved with more numbers than what it says in the plan, it doesn't necessarily cause issues in terms of the phosphates. We have you know, a system whereby Scottish Water has a, is licensed by SEPA and has a set limit with which it must comply within, and that is regularly, looked at and assessed. And if the treatment works meets the requirements set out by that license, then SEPA and Scottish Water are basically advising that that is in accordance with the license and is an acceptable limit. So there is a a precaution in there as well.
Oh, yes.
Thanks. So just to follow up, so I think I got confirmation there that yes, the 10% reduction has not resulted in the plan has not resulted in a 10% reduction in the number of house builds, because and we have actually exceeded that given the number of permissions. But I would then like to take on opposing pages, I have in 5.8 bullet 1 and in 5.4. So the Kinross Local Committee, and understand residents who made representations at the Planning and Development Management Committee in July 2020 that's referenced elsewhere in the report, have raised the issue of continued issues with combined sewers where the storm drains overflow during periods of heavy rainfall, releasing sewerage into the catchment. And that is set against, in section 5.4, the final input of phosphorus or phosphates to the loch being controlled by Scottish Water in accordance with their licence, as Ms Murray has just referenced. So the normal discharge is in accordance, is monitored and dealt with, and that's done in accordance with a licence. But the concern was about the excess in the combined sewers, and we don't actually have, if I'm right, in place a policy either through the local development plan, through supplementary guidance, wherever, to deal with this issue, do we? There's exceedances above T plan in the number of housings being built, and there's nothing to deal with this combined overflow, which is as a result of the number of houses that there are in the area.
Yeah, I can talk to that, Brenda. Yes, thank you for that, Councillor. Yes, you're right. We're working with certainly with SEPA and with Scottish Water at the moment, and trying to work out if there are ways to improve and address the combined sewer overflow situation. Scottish Water has put in extra tanks at Milnerthorpe to try and control some of the extra flow that's coming in, and it is something that has been exacerbated by climate change with heavy rainfall events. So yeah, we're very aware of it, and we're working with SEPA and looking to work with Scottish Water on ways to reduce the amount of water that is coming in through the combined sewer. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we turn to questions from Councillor Tarrant and Councillor Lane, I noticed, Peter Marshall, you've put in you'd like to comment, so can I come over to you?
Thank you, Convener. I think what you have to look at is the number of completions each year. TAPLAN and our own local development plan sets the targets for the area. It's not about everything that has consent, it's also about the number of completions per year meeting the target set out in TAPLAN. And if you look over the time period from when TAPLAN was adopted, I'm pretty confident you will find out that we have not met these targets in terms of delivery. So there are other aspects other than just the over provision of housing on specific sites. There are a number of sites that don't come forward and don't deliver at all, or don't deliver within the time frame that's estimated. So it's a little bit more complicated scenario. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Right, question now from Councillor Barrett. followed by a question from Councillor Lee.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm on the phosphorus mitigation checklist at page 104 of 118, or page 4 of the document itself. I'm a little confused by the question in that checklist. Will the drainage be diverted out with the catchment area, or is the development to be connected to the local drainage network in Drum, Scotland Well or Kinross? Is that one question or two, or are they mutually exclusive? Thanks.
Yes, I'll answer that as best I can. So yes, it's like if the drainage is being diverted privately and is going out with the catchment, then that's fine. The Drum, Scotland Well and Kinross works are also diverted outside the catchment. Scottish Water put that into place as part of the measures to reduce the amount of phosphorus going into the loch at the time. So I guess the first half of the question is really aimed at if you're not connecting to an existing local drainage network, and then the second part is otherwise if you're connecting to a local drainage network which is already diverted out to the catchment.
Thanks.
Oh. Okay.
Thanks, Convener. I'll just make it a comment. Thank you. Happy to formally second, Convener. Thanks for that. I think whilst any improvement in water quality is to be welcomed, the climate change issue of increasing air temperature and water temperature will possibly have a far greater effect than house building and phosphorus emissions from that, and the effect on algal bloom in Loch Leven. And the question, I know that we can only legislate for the planning side of it, but I feel that as in the Lunan Valley that Councillor McEwen talked about earlier, there's a far greater mitigation need about farming methods, where that feeds into the water system just as much with runoff and phosphorus and nitrogen that is gone. So I think we need, although this is a start, I think there'll need to be more joined up thinking as we move forward if we're going to turn the clock back on this subject.
Would you like yeah, I can respond to that comment if you like.
Robert, were you going to make?
Yes, sorry, the internet's not working well. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Yes, that's also a good point, and we are working with SEPA on some of those measures. They already have a program in place to work with farmers as a priority catchment. So they're currently looking around the loch, and we're hoping to extend that further up the loch. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Any more comments? Can we agree the report? Thanks. It's not quite, though, the end of proceedings. I'd certainly like on this report to thank Brenda, Robert, and also Peter Marshall. And it's Peter I'd like to turn to, because before we end today, I just would like to say for Peter, he has been and he is about to retire over the next few weeks. He has been one of the most recognisable, long-serving officers of this council. I've only known him really since I was elected in 2017, but I've always found any questions that have been put to him on planning issues, on more recently climate change issues, always gives a very erudite, very thorough and very considered response. And it really is appreciated. He was, he's currently the council service manager for planning and housing strategy, but he actually started his local government career on, I'm told, the 4th of December 1978 with the City of Dundee District Council as a planning assistant on the massive salary of £4,056 per annum. He then applied for a job with Perth and Kinross District Council as senior planner in April 1991, and then started in August 1991. And I'm told he was very quickly in 1995 awarded a special incremental merit offered to only a very limited number of staff once a year. And it really was apparently quite a major achievement at the time. And I think from an early stage, he demonstrated just his outstanding abilities. According to apparently the head of HR at the time, the modest payment of £700 was, quote, a modest one, but for his personal record, it was a mark of distinguishment. He then moved to being a planning officer post with Perth and Kinross in April 1996, then was promoted to principal planner in early March 2001, and then became the planning and sustainable development manager in 2007, and finally to the post that he now holds. Within his reference for the job in 2001, and I quote again, his referee noted his acknowledge of the development planning process is impressive, and Peter is always trying to integrate the work of other council departments and other outside agencies into the process. This is an approach which Peter has continued to develop over the years, and that's certainly, I think we've seen with the whole issue of climate change, where I think he's contributed immensely to the progress we've made on that front over the last few years. He's also played a major part, really major part, in the 2 local development plans. And you look not just at the large tome that is LDP1 or LDP2, but it's all the supplementary documents and guidance. And it really is an immense amount of work. Still, he's served 43 years in local government, and he's now decided to retire. I'm told it's been said that Peter knows every road, house, and perhaps nearly every blade of grass within the council area. I must say, his detailed knowledge, his experience, his attention to detail will be really sadly missed. And I must say, I regret you going. I do think, as I said earlier, I found over the last 5 years, the contribution has been hugely helpful. So all the very best, Peter, in your retirement. And I know that comes from everyone here. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener, for your kind words and for reminding me of my career. It's so long, I've forgotten bits of that. But really, as a manager, you're only as good as the team that supports you, and I'm eternally grateful to all the people I've had, both past and present, for their cooperation. And I have to say that I've enjoyed my time with Perth and Kinross. Well, the majority of it. You can't say you enjoy every minute of it. And it's provided a lot of job satisfaction. But my highlights have been working with communities positively to deliver their aspirations. And this really fits well with the concept of the Perth and Kinross offer. But this isn't new. We've been working with communities and, looking back to 1995, working on the Kinross strategy, that's what generated the paper you've just heard, the joint work with the communities there. And this was long before local action plans or local place plans were on the agenda. But, I know my team are all up for the challenge of the offer. But increasingly, our work with communities has been reduced because the direct contact with them due to the legislative burden we've been facing, and we need to free up the time to do that. I'd like to say just one more thing, just give you a perception of what it's like being a planning officer in Perth and Kinross. In the mid-2000s, we were approached by a community near Co2 desperately in need of more affordable housing for local families. And we got together with the community and we had a workshop up there one night. And we told them, apart from the bit that floods, we're open to anywhere you want to put the houses. So after an hour and a half of arguing, one of the residents stood up and called for quiet. And then to great applause, he said, all we're doing here is arguing amongst ourselves. Why don't you go away? Tell us where the houses are going to go, and then we can blame it all on you. And I think that sums up what it's like being a planning officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And hope we'll see. Right, that finishes the meeting. Thank you, everyone.